Good to see you again.
Good to see you, man.
Speaking of seeing people again, Keira, you've worked with her before.
Yes.
That's got to help.
It helps a lot.
Yeah, I mean, because
Yeah.
these are intense characters, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But knowing that relationship, working on this probably was a good thing.
A perfect thing. Couldn't do it without it.
How do you get ready for a role like this? I mean, we know the historical parts of World War II. Mm-hmm. I was actually at the Churchill bunkers yesterday before I saw this movie.
Cool, aren't they? Fantastic.
It's fascinating. It kind of made me think of the historical part of war and that particular war. And then I see this movie, something that you don't know about, the aftermath. Excuse the pun, but...
Yeah, of putting Germany back together. Actually, and somebody taking responsibility for, a nation which just was destroyed, and had nothing. It had no right to do anything either. It was... it was an incarcerated nation that everyone could take a piece of. I did a lot of what you did. I came to London, actually. I went to the bunkers, the Imperial War Museum, all that stuff. And then I had to read, I had to understand Germany. I mean, all my history that I'd read through my life was about, the war itself and the battles and the victories and, the World at War, the BBC. The Germans as bad guys, allies, took losses to begin with, then fought back and eventually won, Anthony Beevor's book on the fall of Berlin and the Russians and their path all the way back from Moscow to Berlin was just astonishing, and how much payback and vengeance and destruction, and rightfully so in one way, because the Germans destroyed the Russians, but they copped it. They copped it in reverse themselves. They suffered big time, and that really helped me understanding the mess that Lewis had to deal with and the challenge he was taking on, not just in literally doing it, but with his own wife and friends and family, and to then bring one of them into his house.
You are in uniform, all of the movie, pretty much. Was it comfortable to wear?
Yeah. Well,
really? You look great in it. I've just said about three-quarters of the film, like, he's in uniform the entire movie.
No, it was great. I mean, it also gave me, because they were authentically made too. I remember I was standing out once where we were in Prague out in the woods, and it was freezing. I mean, really cold, that I still couldn't get warm enough and all this stuff. Even though you couldn't really, move around. It was so cold. I mean, it's a wonderful, I love those uniforms, that... It's like, as a child, I grew up watching these movies, these period English movies, so I've always wanted to be in one. For me, it was like a fantasy come true, tanks going past and cars and...
Every boy's dream.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
What was the most challenging for you? Because you have some pretty intense scenes. We're not giving anything away, but there are some pretty intense war scenes, specifically with your character.
Yeah. The challenging thing was to not overdo it. I always looked at Lewis as a branch in a big storm, and it just keeps bending and bending, and one thing after another, his child, his war, his own, what he's done, what he's going to continually do, being hated even by his own men now because he's looked as being sympathetic to the Germans, but then also seeing what's happened to these poor Germans, and then his wife and the guy he's invited that he just kept bending, this man, but he didn't break.
Can I tell you, I hate to use a Twilight reference, but I was Team Lewis the entire movie.
Oh, good.
I was your guy, entire film.
And that was important to me, because in most of these films you go, okay, well, no, to make the other relationship work, Lewis has got to do something bad or be horrendous, which is where most things go, And I love that the book and the film never went there. It was never like that. And, Stefan's not a bad guy. You don't begrudge him for wanting to find a life and happiness. All these people in this ashes, good, right, wrong, German, English, they've got a right to live, and we all want to live, and we all want to, build rather than destroy.
Good to see you again.
And you.
So yesterday, we're in London, I should point out.
Yes.
I went to the Churchill War Museum.
Oh, the bunker.
The bunkers.
The bunker's great.
And then I see this movie, so I was kind of like set up for it.
Yeah.
It was a World War II kind of day.
It was a bit, wasn't it?
And it made me think of my first question for you.
Yeah.
Because we know the historical parts of war.
Yeah.
Especially, World War II and those wars, from back in the day. Mm-hmm. This film, for me, kind of puts a different, face on it, like a human side.
That's sort of what I loved about it. And it's also, because we've seen a lot of World War II films, and they're fascinating. But, I'd never seen, and there probably is a film, but I'd never seen it, set exactly in this bit of this directly after the war has finished, and dealing with the aftermath, hence the title, of that. How do you rebuild? How do you rebuild cities, nations? How do you rebuild yourself? How do you rebuild relationships? How, as enemies, do you suddenly see each other as human beings again? And I think that it was something that's dealing with all of that. So normally in World War II films, you're very much dealing with that kind of Nazi Allied forces, good versus evil kind of vibe, but this is how do you rebuild after that's happened? How on earth, after you've been taught to kind of kill each other for the previous 6 years, do you suddenly see each other as human beings again? I thought it was very relevant. I thought they were very interesting, relevant themes.
Big time. And I'm not even in the movie, so all I had to do for me to get prepared was to go to the War Museum.
There you go, yeah.
But my question to you also is, how do you're dealing with grief.
Yeah.
There's a forgiveness theme.
Yeah.
How did you mentally prepare for this role?
I don't know. I found it, I think the power of the script was that you could kind of instantly empathize with these characters. And I thought what I loved about all of them is that you could see it from all of their different points of view, which isn't an easy thing to do, and you could exactly see why they hated each other, and you could exactly see what brought them back together. And as far as the couple goes, I think that every grown-up has been through probably a failed relationship where suddenly you look at your partner and it should be the person that you know best in the world, and you suddenly don't recognize them at all, and you realize that you're two complete strangers. I mean, that with this in a more extreme way is what this couple are dealing with, and somehow they managed to rebuild that, and they managed to kind of come back together. So I think it's a very grown-up story. I think it's a very grown-up love story.
Do you know how many people are watching this right now going, you just saved me, you just helped me?
That's what happened.
We're doing that today.
Yeah.
We talked last at Colette. Fantastic movie.
Thank you.
You are so good. I love your work anyway, but the period pieces that you do, I'm a huge fan of.
Thanks.
So
that's a lot of them, so thanks.
No, but it's
Thank you.
You just do great work in these types of films.
You.
What draws you to these roles?
I think the characters are just very interesting. They're generally speaking very complex characters dealing with a complex kind of time. But also I loved history. So I love, this was a period of time that I actually didn't know anything about. I know a lot about the Second World War. I knew nothing about the aftermath of that war, the direct aftermath. And so it was fascinating just to kind of learn. I didn't know that there was an English occupation of large parts of Germany. I didn't know what that was. So I think it's just that idea of finding out, I get to educate myself, which I quite enjoy.
Great to see you again, my man.
Yeah, you too.
What an emotional character, emotional role. How do you get ready for something like this?
It was, I read, there was a novel, not a novel, it's Gita Sereni's Albert Speer, his Battle with Truth was probably the book that helped me the most in understanding the war and the aftermath of the war, and how you deal with guilt and your own position and your own sense of responsibility. So that one was very instrumental to getting ready and to finding the character.
Because, we hear the historical, you learn it, of course, in school, World War II, the historical facts and things like that, but this part of the war, you just don't hear about a lot. People dealing with the after effects.
Yeah.
Of course, people are dealing with that in the world right now because of things that are going on. We won't go down that path.
Yeah.
But this is a human part of dealing with the chaos, really, that happens from things that are out of your control.
Yeah, and it's a movie of what happens when the spotlight is off after when the bombs have stopped falling, and it's all quiet, and but the survivors are there, and how do they cope, and how do they move on, how do they survive, how do they go on living, and I thought it was very interesting that it's set in Hamburg, in Germany, so on the other side, on the losing side of the war, and you see you understand that there were obviously a lot of people suffering on that side as well, and they weren't all evil Nazis. The world is slightly more complex than that.
You have some pretty intense scenes with your co-stars. How much trust goes into putting those scenes on film?
Well, it's crucial to establish that trust, and before you go into those scenes, that you feel like you're in it together, and that you trust your partner, then absolutely.
First thing I should have said when I sat down was nice house, by the way.
It's all right. It's not bad, right?
Man, nice. Can I crash? Can I come by?
I think we got enough space for
I
you.
think you do. Where did you film this?
We shot it in 2 places. So in Prague or outside of Prague for about a month, and then 2 months in Hamburg. So the actual house was, the interior of the house was outside of Hamburg, about 45 minutes north of Hamburg.
After you do a role like this, play in a story like this, as an actor, how do you leave this experience? In other words, how did it impact you?
You try to. It was very intense, and you try to go and do something very different. Yeah, tonally, just find another project that's tonally maybe lighter, or that just kind of where you do something slightly different. I find that very helpful, and it's also creatively more exciting. Obviously, if you spend a couple of months playing one type of character, you want to go off and do something very different. So it feels like a new challenge and a new chapter.